On today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Raina Dauria, a leader in the Johnson & Johnson family of companies since 2003. Raina is the Vice President for Global Regulatory Affairs Policy at Johnson & Johnson MedTech, as well as leading the regulatory talent management strategy. In this episode, we spoke about soft skills and the fact that soft skills are actually the hardest skills to nail down, but they're also the most critical skills when it comes to wanting to advance your career. Raina shared with me her biggest learnings over her career, the hardest feedback that she ever had to listen to, as well as what it takes to make it in a global multinational company. This is one that is packed full of gems, guys. I hope you enjoy. Happy listening. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today is a very special day because we have with us Raina Dauria, Vice President of Global Regulatory Policy and Talent. What an amazing job title, Raina. Tell us more about what you do.
Thank you, Elena. I'm so happy to be here. In my policy role, so it's two jobs put together. And in my policy role, I lead a team of truly amazing, seasoned regulatory professionals who use their extensive experience and network to support the shaping of medical device regulation for future innovation and to guide real-world use of proposed legislative changes to regulation that could impact our ability to bring life-saving products to patients. In my second part of my job, I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to lead the talent development and learning strategies for our regulatory affairs function and R&D organizations in MedTech. And that started as a passion project for me, but I'm thrilled that in the last 2 years, I've been able to add it to the scope of my role here at Johnson & Johnson.
That's a really forward-looking type of position as well, right? Because policy is something that we're seeing companies start to create more formalized positions around. But actually, I don't know a lot of VPs of regulatory that have talent in their title. So that's super exciting to see actually that Johnson & Johnson is giving it that focus. And well, today we're going to be talking about a theme that's actually really important. And it's everything to do with soft skills. So the theme for today is that soft skills are actually quite hard. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about how the importance of soft skills can help accelerate your career in medtech. So before we jump into that, I'd love to know more. This is a question I love to ask everybody that works in regulatory affairs, is how did you even get into regulatory? Because everyone's always got a fantastic story.
Yeah, I love this question because, well, everyone asks it, right? How did you get into regulatory affairs? How did you get in? Because everyone has a different answer in the details, but so many people start in the same way. And I kind of fell into it, right? Especially those who started a couple of decades ago, like I did. Thankfully, today, there are undergrad and graduate programs available to develop these skills, but in the 90s, they didn't really exist. So like many who've been doing it for decades, I loved the idea of blending science and communication and negotiation. I always enjoyed writing, which is a critical capability in the regulatory space. So when I left my undergrad with a BS in biology, not able to afford medical school, which was always my goal, I decided to take some time off and I entered the field of research as so many of us do. I was offered an amazing opportunity as an assistant in a surgical research lab, which surgery and research and medicine, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. Through that role, I created a network with medical companies that were using our lab space for their research, and I was approached to take a role in quality. And I loved the business side of things. I didn't know it, but I got into a company and I realized that medicine and healthcare and business together was really where I was meant to be. So I found regulatory affairs through that, and it allows me to do all of the things that I love.
So you spoke about kind of writing and communication as some of like the critical capabilities for somebody working in regulatory affairs. What are some of the others that spring to mind when you think about that?
Yeah, there are you mentioned that we're going to talk about soft skills, but I would say that those things are kind of the hard skills, the what used to be called the hard skills, the technical skills, right? The submissions, negotiation, and technical writing, and how to be clear. Clarity in communication is important. That kind of crosses the line between that technical and soft skill space. But really, it was for regulatory. I think it's the ability to understand what the regulators are looking for, to listen to what they're telling you, and to be able to translate it to your teams
Mhm,
internally in your company, and then turn it around and create responses that give the regulators what they need to hear
mhm,
to make them understand what you're trying to say about your products.
mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot of technical pieces to regulatory affairs.
Yeah, and so let's dive into soft skills then. So
Sure.
for anyone listening, like who's like, okay, well, what's a soft skill? How would you define a soft skill, and why do you actually think that they're important?
The soft skills are basically the how that you bring to work, regardless of the what that's going on around us. How you work with other people, how one communicates, how you listen, which I actually think is probably the most important soft skill. It's really the people skills. They can be related to emotional intelligence, critical thinking, work ethic,
Mhm.
collaboration. So it's all of the things that aren't necessarily technical that you can learn in a classroom. I recently heard that soft skills actually are being rebranded as power skills, which
Interesting.
I think is just amazing because soft and power don't feel like they go together. And calling these critical skills, these critical leadership skills soft, it kind of gives the misperception that it minimizes their importance, and it makes it seem as though maybe they're the easier. They're not hard, they're soft, so they must be easier, but I think that they're not easy. They're really the hard skills. I remember someone telling me when I first started in business that soft skills are the kinds of skills that you're born with, and I think that that's maybe the biggest misconception of all, because you can learn these. You can practice them. And in fact, I think over time, if you're paying attention, you will learn them whether you like it or not, right? In order to be successful, you will learn them. It takes practice to master this kind of power skills that really make a person the strongest leader possible. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because that's why kind of we came up with this theme, right? That soft skills are actually hard because, as you say, soft skills often are kind of considered or kind of given the feeling that they're like fuzzy, kind of warm, kind of, hard to quantify, and so they're kind of
Yeah,
there in the background. And let's all focus, especially in regulator, which often when you start your career, it is a technical kind of role, right? And so let's focus really on the technical skills and the qualifications and getting certificates and all the detailed aspects that associate regulatory affairs. I recruit a lot of directors. And so then it becomes, okay, well, what does it take for me to become a VP? And okay, I'm a senior manager, but why aren't I able to secure that director role? And at that kind of level, often what I see is that it's not about how many 510Ks have you written, but it's actually about how do you communicate with the business? Like how do you develop your team? How do you come across as a leader? And it is these soft skills that actually start to matter more and more. I don't know if you've seen something similar.
absolutely. It is also how you communicate how you've done those things.
Mhm,
So yeah, it's not about, how I think people want to be told, I have a checklist of all of the things that I need to do in order to get to this
yeah.
next step, and I've done all of those things, and so I must be ready. And it's not that simple. It is a perception of you as a leader, as how you've grown talent, how you've shared of yourself across your teams.
Mhm,
There's something I learned early on. When you're a new manager of people or a new people leader, I think you don't necessarily come with that empathy of
mhm,
how people need to learn and
Mhm.
how people grow, because you're still learning and growing yourself.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that's absolutely true, is that it's not just 510Ks, it's not just PMAs. Sometimes it is. Sometimes those are skills we're looking for. But when you get to be a VP or even a senior director, what got you there is not what's going to get you to the next step. And that's a lesson that I learned the hard way, that I think a lot of people learn the hard way, because nobody really teaches it to you. And that's why I tend to share my experiences so much with my team, with my mentees, with junior talent. I love to share everything I've learned, because I'm trying to make it easier for the next person to realize that it's not necessarily getting involved in the biggest project or the most exposed project or the biggest win of the company. It's really how people see you as a leader.
Mhm, mhm. So in the spirit of sharing experiences, I'm curious to know, like, the moment that you realized, actually, these things are really important. These are things I need to give attention and focus in order for me to progress my career.
It's not more than one.
Okay.
There's definitely levels of learning, and I'm still learning a
Mhm.
lot of this. I think if you're stopping learning, then you're not growing. So definitely started in my first people leadership experience. Um, I mentioned that I didn't have a lot of empathy. I didn't have a lot of wanting to give up exposure to someone else. I didn't have a lot of patience for teaching people things they didn't know how to do. I hadn't learned yet that their successes were a positive reflection on me. I was still in a place where I had something to prove to myself and to others. And I think that's a natural progression as a leader, is uh, when you get to a place that you're willing to kind of say, I'm going to lift up the next person behind me. And doing that is actually a really positive reflection on myself. When you learn that, I think that's a big step. And I definitely had that moment. Um, I've had moments too where I've sat in boardrooms and I thought I had to be the first person to speak. I had to be the first person with the idea, because if I had an idea and someone else said it, then I didn't get credit for it.
Mhm.
Those are things and experiences that you start to think over time. It doesn't really matter who came up with the idea. It's what's best for the company. It's how do we execute? How do we add and collaborate on those ideas? So it's more than one moment. But those are things that I bet people can hear me say and think, yeah, I've had those moments. I've had that moment where I thought that if I wasn't the one who said it, then someone else is getting the credit for it. Those are hard times to get over.
Yeah.
But once you get past that and you realize that it's so rewarding to see someone else be successful because of something you taught them, or because of you mentored an employee and now they're somewhere in the spotlight, and you think, I had a part in that.
Mhm.
That's really like winning the lottery.
You spoke about empathy, and you've mentioned it already a couple of times through the conversation that we've had so far. And it's something that I start to see more, like, people talking about empathy more and more. But how do you kind of get the balance of being empathetic as a leader, but equally holding your people accountable to deliver, and also not necessarily being their friend?
Yeah, it's a great question. Empathy is not being somebody's parent or
Mhm.
holding their hand. It's about saying, I understand what you're going through. I've been there. Here's what I learned from my experience, and here's what I hope you take away from this. And now let's go together and take accountability for what's happened. Because as a leader, whatever accountability your employees have to take, you have to take a portion of it, because you're
Mhm.
there training them, you're teaching them. There's probably a gap in something that you were trying to show them or teach them, And yeah, I mean, empathy is about saying, look, you're winning or you're learning, right? This doesn't have to be a loss. It's about how you get up after a stumble. We've all done this. You're not alone. We're a team. We have a saying here, one team, one win. It goes with the losses too. So that's what empathy is, but it's definitely not about standing in front of them and taking the accountability and the brunt yourself, because they're not going to learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your employees are not going to learn from you protecting them from backlash or from them seeing the challenges that their decisions had on the business. I think they're only going to learn and grow through these adverse things that happen. But being empathetic is about saying, we've all done it. We've all had our missteps and we've all learned through it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if somebody's sort of like listening to this and kind of coming to the realization of, okay, I really want to focus on my soft skills and developing that, I think I need to do that now. What advice would you have for people in terms of what practical steps can they take in order to start working on some of these skills? Is it a training course?
There are training courses, of course, and I would suggest that there are probably very good ones, and there's value in that. I think that the best thing that they can do is get a sponsor, get a mentor, somebody who they want to emulate, that they respect and trust. I think that's the first step. The next step is probably to gather information that of the perception of themselves. Maybe it's a 360 survey. Maybe it's as simple as setting one-on-ones with your stakeholders. And that starts with knowing who your stakeholders are, which is a big step in leadership. But setting time to listen to people's perception and asking them to be really honest. Like, where do you see my opportunities as a leader? And so collecting that information and then reflecting on it. One of the things through my talent and learn team is, and one of the Johnson & Johnson culture, the things that we drive through our learning culture is a reflection exercise, thinking about what you're doing, where you want to be, how you want to grow as a leader, as a career in your career. And I think reflecting on and listening to people's feedback is important. People love to say feedback is a gift that nobody likes to open, but I think that it's important to open it and think about it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because feedback is one of these things that I love that quote, by the way. But it's kind of hard to get, you know, it's kind of hard to get true feedback. And what I've learned is what really matters is the way that you ask for it.
Yeah.
And so just kind of going to people and just going, hey, have you got any feedback for me? Is just somehow really, really open and doesn't really give enough focus. And so typically people are kind of like, yeah, you're doing good. Don't really have much to add. So what's your piece of advice? Like, what's the question to ask in order for you that's really worked around trying to get that really valuable feedback?
I think you have to start with where you want to be. I want to be the head of this company in 5 years. Can you give me some feedback and ideas on how I can go from where I am today to where I want to be? It's really specific, right? It's specific and yet not, because you're not saying I want to learn how to do something technical. You're saying I want to be like that person, or I want to do that role. What's it going to take? And I think that makes people think differently. When you say, do you have any feedback? They're thinking about the last time that they interacted with you in that meeting about that thing or about that project. They're not necessarily thinking of you as something different, as someone different than how they interact with you today. And so you need to be clear with them. What kind of feedback are you looking for? Are you looking for growth feedback? Are you looking and ask for that?
What's the toughest feedback you've ever received? I'm putting you on the spot. This is not prepared.
Nobody wants to share the feedback, the critical feedback, right? But that is important, and it is part of empathy too. I share it in one-on-ones a lot. I've had feedback that what's interesting about it is that people, when I share this with people, they say, that's not at all you. I can't believe you got that feedback. I got feedback once that I was a selfish leader, that I was somebody who was just looking to promote myself, and I wasn't thinking about that person's development, and I didn't care. And I used to keep that feedback because it was in writing in one of my 360s, and I used to keep it taped into one of my notebooks. And somebody said to me, you need to stop doing that. You're not that leader. That was that person's perception. And the thing is, it was that person's perception. And I did have to reflect on that. And I had to think about, what did I do that made that person feel that way? There was a lot happening at that time. So, but still learning through that feedback and never wanting to receive that kind of feedback again, or making anyone feel that way again, whether it was, something I said or did, that person felt that way, and I made them feel that way. So I had to take ownership and accountability for that. And but it was also good advice that when someone said, you need to take that out now. That's the past. You need to let it go. But I still think about it. It's hard.
I think it's sometimes like the hard feedback, sometimes it can really stay with you if you take it really to heart. And have you ever felt, so this is also a loaded question, but have you ever felt as a woman feedback has come to you in a specific way, and part of it is gendered or not?
Of course. I think that assertive women tend to be seen as aggressive. When a woman might feel like we have to be more aggressive to be heard. And I think that it's difficult to, and it's not conscious. I don't think people are consciously excluding or making us feel this way, but it is something that does happen. And I've had some of the most critical feedback I've had that I think was gendered came from women, other women. And I would say that we need to stop doing that. We need to lift one another up more. We need to talk to each other. And that feedback, I've had feedback about that aggressive comment, right? That she's aggressive in meetings. And it came from a woman. It was in writing. It was in a review. And I would have loved for that woman to come to me and say, hey, this kind of feels like you're being aggressive. Give that feedback in person, I would suggest. But yeah, absolutely. Women in the workplace, especially in the boardrooms, we have to balance the perception of being a woman while also being a strong person. And it can be a challenge.
So what other particular moments of adversity have sort of stood out for you when you reflect back on your career?
I've gone through moments where I was demoted. They call it releveling, but it's still painful when you've achieved something and then all of a sudden you're back to square one in your mind. I have had times where I knew that I didn't say something that I should have, or I said something that I shouldn't have. I've had harsh feedback. I haven't gotten jobs that I wanted. Always after those moments, those are like the down moments. Almost right afterwards are some of the highest moments that I've ever had. and it really makes me believe that these things happen for a reason. These are learning moments. If I didn't get the job, it's because something else was coming along, and somebody in the company usually had a better idea about where I should be and where I should be going, than I thought I did, than I did. I've had lots of those moments, and I expect I'll have more of them.
Mhm.
I Not that I want adversity, but again, we're all learning and growing, and if you're too comfortable, you're not growing,
Mm.
you're not learning. And so I don't like to get too comfortable.
Mm. And you made a really interesting comment. I think you said it at the beginning, but also on our prep call, where you said about falling down, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's not about it's about how you get back up, and what you decide to do after those moments that you're falling. It's about standing back up, and learning through that change. And yeah, you never fail until you stop trying.
Exactly. And you made some of these references. I mean, getting demoted, not getting the job you want, getting some really, really harsh feedback. Like, these sound like really, really tough moments. What is it that like what process did you go through in order for you to say, hey, I'm going to give this another shot, or as opposed to, okay, I'm just going to leave this there, maybe this is not for me?
Yeah. Well, so particularly in the time my job was re-leveled, and I had achieved vice president. I was very excited. Um, but honestly, somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking, this may be too soon. I didn't know what it took to be successful in the role. And when the re-leveling came, it wasn't meant to be a reflection on my performance. It was a restructuring that happened in the company, but it felt like a reflection on my performance. And I had to take time to think about what's changed. What's really changed? Is it just the title? My team was the same. My job was the same. My boss was the same. Everything that I loved about my job before was the same, except for the title. And it took a lot of time to kind of reflect on that, talk to some of my mentors, and really understand what I could take from it. And what I decided was I wanted the opportunity to do it better. One of the things that people ask is, what would you go back and do differently? This was an opportunity to do that, to go back and restart and do it differently and do it better. And so that's what I chose to do. And it was about a year and a half for me to then get offered another vice presidency role. And I felt at that time, yeah, this is right. This feels right. I've grown so much. I've learned a lot through this time. And it's challenging when people come to you and say, "Oh my gosh, I saw your your title up on the screen, and it was so I was so sad for you that you're this now and you were that before." And I had to show that I could be strong through that, and show my team that it's not about the titles, it's about what we're learning through those moments. It was hard,
Mm.
but again, it's a choice.
Mm. And you did succeed, and you are a VP now.
Yeah.
And so what would you say, what does it take to really be a VP in a large multinational like Johnson & Johnson, let's say?
That could take days to talk about. And I think it's different, right, for everybody. But the the first things that come to mind is communication, how to communicate well, not being afraid to network. And network, it has a connotation, I think, that's a little different than what I mean when I say it. And when I say network, I don't mean, schmooze and kind of, be present everywhere, but really really know who your stakeholders are, talk to them, spend time with them, listen to them. Not everybody might want to give you that time or have the time to share it, but it's important to ask them to make time and explain why that time will be valuable to them as well. And that's the most important thing, I think, in being a leader at Johnson and Johnson, and probably at most companies, is understanding what value you bring and being able to articulate that to the leaders around you and above you, and sharing your ideas with them and getting them excited about what you can bring.
That the networking piece is something that comes up time and time again, actually, especially in larger organizations. And I see the stakeholder, the role of the stakeholder becoming more and more important, especially for senior level positions in big organizations. It's very rare that a stakeholder would not be part of an interview panel. And even if you have a hiring manager who would turn around and say, I make the final decision, if the stakeholder turns around and goes, I can't see myself working with that person, it's a very, very tough sell for the decision maker to turn around and say, okay, I'm going to still go ahead and hire them. So the importance of stakeholders and that ability to kind of build cross-transferable relationships that aren't only within your functional area, I start to see becoming more and more important. But then the question is always like, how do you actually go out and get the time with these people? They're all busy, you know, and like, so what tips do you have, Raina, on what can you actually say to get that time with them?
So you're 100% right on everything you said. We're a matrix organization. We might be reporting to one person, but our stakeholders are the critical people that we need to show value to. And you're right also that those people will be on an interview panel and they will be part of succession plan discussions, that your name will come up and they will either know you and have great things to say about you or not, or they won't know you. And that's almost as bad as them not having great things to say about you. So 100% agree with everything you said. What you can say to get on people's calendars, and that's another thing that I'm learning in my new role, my new policy role, because for 20 years I was in regulatory affairs strategy and submissions and franchise, and that was easy to get on people's calendars because they knew what regulatory affairs did. So I can speak from experience in particular a role that some people might not understand. People in the business might say, well, you're working on something that's 10 years from now. I might not even be here 10 years from now. So the things that you can say, first, I think you should know what their hot buttons are and what their hot topic is. So some of that is gather intelligence, learn what's important to that person through discussions with their teams, with their other stakeholders. And once you do that, there's usually a way in. There's usually a way to say, hey, can I have 30 minutes to talk to you about this thing that you know is important to them, that's important to their business, whether, maybe it's how we're winning in China, or maybe it's, how we're going to get this product approved 3 years from now. Those are things that policy has particular ability to shape, and finding a way to make that case and value to them is important. So that's specific to policy, but I think you can do it with any role, really, is understanding what their strategic priorities are, understanding what their vision is for their business, and finding out how you add value. Because honestly, everyone in your company should have goals and objectives that add value to something on the strategic priorities of the CEO. That's just facts. So you should be able to articulate how you're adding to that.
It's really interesting. I just want to highlight what you said around, you're talking about them, you're talking about their priorities, you're talking about where they want to go and how you are going to help them get there, or advice or stuff you've heard from the market, just an in that is relevant to them. It's not about being like, hey, can we have some time to talk about me and what I want and my wants and needs? It's really about focusing in on them and adding value, and that's how you win time on their calendar, and that's how you start to build those networks and relationships.
Absolutely. The conversation about you will come, but
Yeah.
it can't be first.
Yeah.
They have to want to invest in you, and that comes after they know your value.
Mm-hmm. That's really, really interesting perspective, and really important, I think. What are some of the other sometimes mistakes perhaps that you might see people make when they're trying to shoot for the next promotion?
Gosh, it's hard. That's a hard question because I don't like to focus on mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
but opportunities I think that people have are probably around. You just pointed it out, not focusing on yourself, but focusing on what you can give back.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, a lot of times people are thinking about what they need.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's important to think about what the business needs are, and that's going to naturally grow. I think the other thing too is thinking that growth is linear, that it's only vertical,
Yeah.
and sometimes growth is horizontal, and sometimes it's vertical down. Um, there's some really great leadership discussions around how growth in business is like climbing Mount Everest, and you have to go to base camp, and then you have to climb back down, and then you have to climb to base camp 1 and base camp 2, and then back down to 1. And sometimes that's the same thing. You
Mm-hmm.
have to realize that growing in your career might not always be up. It might be over. It might be staying in the same place you're in, but learning something new. And yeah, I mean, I think growth is not always vertical.
Mm.
That's an important
Mm.
thing that
What
people need to realize.
what's your take on let's say somebody moves to a company and they realize that they've made a mistake. What's your take on whether they should stay there to make it look good on their CV or jump quickly afterwards?
I think it depends on why they think it's a mistake.
Mm.
Um, it depends is such a regulatory
So
answer,
I
isn't it? um, if they're not happy, I think they should start looking for their next role. I'm kind of old school, and I've been saying this to my children who are in college and getting ready to go out into the world. I always say it's easier to find a job when you have a job.
Yeah.
So I tend to say don't just jump ship unless you're very, very, very unhappy. Like, I mean, there's reasons
Mm-hmm.
certainly to leave a company or leave a position right away.
Mm-hmm.
And those are probably not that often. But think about what your story is going to be when you are talking to the next company.
Mm.
Why are you looking to leave? Um, don't burn bridges because we are a very small world. But talk about fit, talk about a different culture you might be looking for. Think about the story that you're going to tell and how it's going to reflect on you
Mm.
as, you know, I'm making this decision consciously. I made the decision to go there because of this. I'm making the decision to leave because of this, and or to look for my next opportunity. Maybe it's not I'm looking to leave, but I am looking for my next opportunity.
Mm.
It's not what I thought it was. Whatever the case may be, I think it's having your reasons and your story prepared for
Mm.
the next organization. That's going to be really important because we do look at resumes and we do say, oh, that person was only there for 6 months. What happened?
Mm.
If you see that over and over again, it's a pattern. But if you see it, once or twice, it will be a question.
Yeah.
And I think just being prepared to answer it, it's fine as long as you've reflected on why.
I think it's what I'm getting really strongly through this conversation around soft skills is the number one that we keep coming back to is communication. Like how you talk, it's the how you talk about these things, how you talk about these experiences, how you talk about where you want to go, where you've been, your strengths, your weaknesses. The communication is the number one that keeps coming up over and over again. And if, you know, when it comes to like making that career move, if you've got, you know, if you've thought through how you're going to position it, how you're going to frame it, and how you're going to communicate it, I don't know any hiring manager that would be like, okay, you made one bad choice in your career, like we're not going to consider you for this role.
Yes.
So one thing that you touched on and you mentioned a couple of times is around sponsorship and mentorship, and I know that's something that you're really, really passionate about. How would you define the difference, first of all, between the two different things?
Mentorship is when you have somebody, again, that you trust and that you can share your feelings, your difficult moments with, and they can help guide you and show you what you can learn and take away from it. To me, that's what mentorship is. It's really a trust over time.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are a lot of mentorship programs, and
Mm-hmm.
I believe in mentorship programs very strongly. But I think some of the best mentorships are the ones that develop naturally
Mm-hmm.
through you see somebody, you've developed a relationship with them, and you've already got a rapport, and you
Mm-hmm.
say, would you mind if I reached out, we spent some time talking about my career? Those are the kind of mentorships that I've always found more valuable for myself, and I think
Mm-hmm.
for others. Sponsorship is what people say about you in other forums. So it's when you know that you've got supporters that are going to be sitting in that succession plan discussion, that are going to be sitting in that boardroom when your name comes up, or when a project comes up, or when, you know, an exciting, interesting new innovation comes up and they say, we need Raina, Dauria on that.
Mm-hmm.
That's sponsorship. When it's this position is opening up, we're looking to fill it with a bright, energetic, innovative person who's a great leader. Oh, I know someone.
Mm.
It's that. That's
Mm-hmm.
sponsorship.
So
That's harder.
that's what I was going to say, because surely that's not just a case of going up to someone and saying, hey, will you sponsor me the next time you're in those big meetings? Just make sure you say my name. So how do you actually earn kind of, I feel like it's something that you need to earn. But how do you get a sponsor?
It's I thought that it was just natural. I did until recently. I thought, oh, it's your boss, it's your peers, it's maybe your boss's boss. I did think that
Mm-hmm.
until recently. I realized it's more than that. And it goes back to what we talked about, knowing all of the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned stakeholder mapping. Stakeholder mapping can't stop at one level. You have to go 2 and 3 levels. And you know, you have to know who your boss's stakeholders are and who their stakeholders are. And once you do that and you've created those relationships with those people, that they are aware of who you are and what you do in the company, and again about the value you bring, maybe not completely, but they know that you've done something amazing, you know, maybe it's one thing, maybe it's 2 things, then they know your name, and then they can sponsor you, and they might sponsor you, even if they only know one thing about you, but they won't if they know nothing about you.
Yeah. So visibility and
Visibility.
networking.
Yes, and invisibility is not going to come naturally.
Mm.
Not always. It might in your immediate circle,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're talking about a company that's as large as Johnson and Johnson, it's not going to be natural. It
Mm.
has to be a conscious decision to find places to bring exposure to yourself.
Mm-hmm. And so this is called being strategic with your career, right? It's actually, you do your day job, you do your leadership job, but then also you think about where you want to go, and then you build these intentional relationships with the people that ultimately will help you get there.
Yes.
So talking about kind of like mentoring and sponsorship and advice, what's the best bit of advice that you have ever had on the theme of kind of like communication, soft skills, career growth? Take your pick.
I've had some amazing sponsors and some amazing mentors across my career and my life. I think though the one that I always come back to is from my dad. He said, and I'll never forget, we were sitting at the dining room table. We had a lot of intellectual dialogues around the dining room table in my childhood. And one particular time, my father looked at me and said, you didn't listen to my question. So your answer was not what I was looking for. You need to listen. Don't be thinking about your response while somebody is asking you the question. Listen, think, and then respond. And I do that a lot. That takes practice too, because I think it's human nature to think we know what the question's going to be. It is an important regulatory talent as well to make sure we listen to the regulators' questions. And so I've taken that piece of advice through a lot of parts of my career, whether it's through the regulatory space, the strategy space, the submission space, or the leadership space. Listening, thinking, responding.
It's really powerful, but it is true that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yes, that's exactly right. For a reason.
For a reason, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Raina, it's been so fascinating talking to you. And honestly, like, thank you for bearing all in this conversation. I know there's been moments where you've really kind of bared your heart with some of these difficulties that you've experienced through your career. But I think it's really important because it's so inspiring for people to know that actually it looks glossy on LinkedIn, but it's taken really hard work. And it's taken stumbling and picking yourself back up and having to keep going in order to get to where you are. My one last question that I love to ask everybody is, what's the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
I hope that when future generations remember me, well, first, I hope they remember me and fondly. But the real legacy I'd like to leave is that I was a servant leader, that I offered empathy, I nurtured growth, I provided opportunities for them to shine, and I shared of myself. And I was vulnerable. And that I built trust with them, that I'm a trusting and trusted person.
Well, that's a very noble purpose to have, and I think just listening to some of the stories of some of the people's careers that you've touched, I can definitely say that you're well on the way to achieving that. Raina, it's been so nice chatting to you today. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun and cathartic.
And hopefully not too scary, right?
Not too scary.
And to all of you listening, don't forget to follow Raina on LinkedIn. And please give this episode a thumbs up, give it a like, give it a comment, and stay tuned for another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed coming soon.